And we're joined now by Julia Chapman, I-24 News contributor in Moscow. Hello again to Julia. So we heard that preliminary press conference before the actual meeting with Naftali Bennett and President Putin. What did you make of what was said in that presser?
That's right. The two leaders are now holding closed-door talks after their introductory remarks to the press, where both leaders praised the growing relationship, the friendly ties, and the historic ties as well between Israel and Russia. Of course, there were mentions of the issues that they will be discussing today, namely the situation with the Iran nuclear deal, the tensions in Syria, as well as bilateral ties, namely economic, scientific, and cultural ones that were listed by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Of course, everyone has been watching very closely what the body language has been, because of course President Putin had a close personal relationship with Mr. Bennett's predecessor, former Prime Minister Netanyahu. There was some footage released by the Russian agencies of President Putin waiting on the steps of his Sochi residence a little bit impatiently before the arrival of Prime Minister Bennett, and if I were to indulge in a bit of Kremlinology, he was making less eye contact than he sometimes does. But certainly the two leaders did praise the growing ties between their countries, noting the trade growing between Israel and Russia over the past year.
Right, that's really interesting what you said there about the body language, because it did seem a little bit like, Bennett wasn't quite as comfortable maybe as Netanyahu, who used to be there, who was in the Kremlin many times. He kind of sat with a sort of closed body language. Putin was a bit hunched over, maybe even looked a little bored at some points. I don't know. But is that just maybe my imagination from over here? What do you make of that?
That was my impression as well, although Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the talks are happening in a friendly atmosphere, although he had said previously that it does take time to build personal relationships. Right. Of course, President Putin and former Prime Minister Netanyahu met many, many times over the years, and so they did have a good relationship, which was credited for many of the agreements and the cooperation between the two countries, not least on Syria and the deconfliction mechanism in place there to avoid conflict between the two countries.
Right, certainly arriving there in Russia, whether Sochi or the Kremlin, can be a little bit intimidating. It's not easy on the first visit to have that kind of good relationship. And, the Iranian nuclear deal, that's surely one of the major issues between the sides here. Where do you think that's going to go? How critical will that be in the talks?
What was interesting is that the issue of Iran wasn't raised in President Putin's introductory remarks, but of course it was mentioned by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, perhaps suggesting that it is an issue of greater importance to Israel than to Russia, because there are tensions, there is discord between the two countries when it comes to Iran. Russia has been a vocal backer of the Iran nuclear deal and is trying to get those talks back on the table to revive that agreement. But the Israeli Prime Minister came here likely with the expectation that he wants to put some pressure on Russia for some sort of conditions, at least, that it might be able to influence over Iran. Russia has been pretty adamant, at least towards the United States, there should be no added preconditions to the Iran nuclear deal when it does get back to the negotiation table. But certainly that will be one of the main topics of discussion and one of the main tension points between the two leaders.
Right. Very interesting stuff there. Julia Chapman, I-24 News contributor, thank you very much.